Welcome to day 3 of the 2021 CLOC Global Institute. My name is Christine Coates, Vice President of Legal Operations and a CLOC board member. I'm so glad you could join us. I'm joined today with Laura Desjardins, Legal Operations and Administration Director at Delta, also a CLOC member and Atlanta's regional leader. We have a great day planned for you today, starting off with our general session. Leading Change, Shaping the Future of Legal Ops. Join Dan Yee as he sits down with Ben Campbell, General Counsel of Deloitte, MICHELE DESTEFANO, Professor of the Law University of Miami, Larry Hoffman, also a Business of Law Chair at the University of Miami, and Ben Allgrove, Partner and Global Head of R&D. We will explore not only adapting to change, but steering and shaping things to create the future with better outcomes for all. I want to thank our sponsor, Thomson Reuters, for the support of this session. Hi, Laura, how are you?
Hi, Chris, thanks so much. I'm doing well, and I hope you are too, and everyone else out there. Before we dive into the general session and the day ahead, I wanted to share what this day means to me, to CLOC, to members, and to the public at large who come to CLOC to learn more about the industry and their role here. CLOC is an extraordinary organization fueled by its great leadership, its members, vendors, suppliers, law firms, and yes, our sponsors, all of whom bring a unique perspective about best practices across the ecosystem. We cannot limit or exclude anyone's involvement based on their race, gender, ethnicity, education, etc. We all deserve a seat at the table. Diverse teams are more successful. It's been proven. And so it's a win-win. I am reminded of a quote from an anonymous author that reads, "Diversity is not the same as inclusion. Diversity invites people to the table, but inclusion empowers your voice to be heard while you're at the table. Diversity without inclusion is shallow marketing. I do not wish to sit at any tables that want my skin for marketing, but not my voice for truth and perspective." And I am certain that there are many of you out there that share those sentiments. There's more that brings us together than separates us.
I agree, Laura. To me, it means being invited to the party. And not only getting to the party, being asked to dance. And then that sense of belonging. I've been there many times at those dances when I wasn't asked. And it definitely, when it comes down to diversity and inclusion in all our corporations, we want to make sure our people belong and they can come with their true meaning as they come to work every day. Toward these messages, CLOC will continue collaborations with organizations like She Breaks the Law with founder Priya Liye to advance women in the legal workspace. CLOC is looking to further its collaborations with more organizations like NAMWF and others to bring programs and opportunities to its members. We'd like to announce that the new CLOC DEI committee has been formed, which is led by Jocelyn Chulinsky at Dow, Omar Swiss at Justice Bid, and Noletta France from Northwestern Mutual. If you're a CLOC member, we invite you to join this group on Community Connect. Laura, what do you think?
Chris, I am thrilled and excited to be invited to join the new D&I committee, but equally am excited to join as the first committee member on a CLOC Educational Advisory Council, where together with the DEI group that you shared, we can share then best practices to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion objectives in the workplace with respect to our hiring, and in the workforce with respect to our hiring, in the workplace, and then department retention, and the marketplace for vendors and suppliers across the entire legal ecosystem. The DE&I committee will also work towards standardizing surveys, diversity measures, and trends for outside counsel, including questions and conversational talking points to address gaps in these measures. Now, many of you may have heard of the Mansfield Rule, which is a measurement of whether law firms have affirmatively considered at least 30% of their lawyers whom are women, people of color, those that live with disabilities, and all LGBTQs for leadership and governance roles, as well as equity partner promotions, formal client pitch opportunities, and senior lateral positions. And then you would ask, do they also get an opportunity to serve on committees and boards? This is just one of the many Mansfield Rule additions that are included out here. You have version 2, version 3, but there's one in particular associated with the diversity lab, which is for legal departments, where for similar criteria for DE&I is benchmarked for law departments to make sure that we're performing well in that space. The fact is we all have continuous work to do to ensure that we make a positive impact on CLOC, the ecosystem, and the world in preparation for the next generation of legal ops professionals. And I'm glad to be a part of it.
That's wonderful, Laura. Thank you. Thank you for all you do for CLOC. We can't wait to see the advancement of these committees in the days ahead. Thank you to our speakers, our sponsors, for what promises to be a fantastic day. And let's get to our next general session.
Thomson Reuters would like to recognize CLOC and the legal operations community for driving transformational change. Here's what's new. Legal Tracker has new data visualization and artificial intelligence in invoice review. HiQ contract management for corporate legal includes document automation and platform flexibility. Sectors in practical law make it easier to quickly find on-point materials. Visit our booth to play trivia, win prizes, and schedule a meeting with our team.
Hello, CLOC. We are here because leading change is challenging. And as everyone in the audience knows, it is especially challenging when you're leading change in law. It's a profession that is proudly built on the foundation of precedent. My name is Daniel Yee. I'm a CLOC board member, and I'm also senior counsel for legal innovation in the government. And today, thanks to our sponsor, Thomson Reuters, I am also someone who has the enormous privilege of talking to 3 incredible panelists. Our panelists come from all different parts of the legal ecosystem, from academia, from the law firm, from in-house, and previously government. But what they all share is that they have succeeded in making change happen in this ecosystem. And today, we are going to have a conversation about their lessons learned, along with where they see the opportunity for each of you in the audience to drive the next big change. Now on to our panelists. I'm going to quickly introduce each one of them, tell you a little bit about why they are absolute rock stars, and then we're going to dive straight into the conversation. MICHELE DeStefano is a professor of law at Miami Law School, and she's also part of Harvard Law School's executive education faculty. She is really single-handedly the driver of what many, including me, have called the most interesting innovation in legal education today, and that is law without walls, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a bit. She's had no shortage of recognition for this and her many, many other efforts, including, for example, being named by the Financial Times as one of the 20 most innovative lawyers, and also being recognized by the ABA as a legal rebel. Hello, MICHELE. Okay, and Ben Campbell. Ben joins us from the in-house world. He's a general counsel for Deloitte, a role he's served in since 2017. And as general counsel, Ben has been on the forefront of many, many different areas, including how to think about new ways of how Deloitte's legal team fundamentally structures itself. He has been a strong voice for driving diversity and inclusion in the legal profession. And I should also add that Ben is quite a well-known figure in the hallowed halls of the Justice Department, because earlier in his career, he led the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. And during that time, he led an office in really taking on a much more elevated profile as far as impacting some of the most pressing issues of the day, including terrorism, financial fraud, public corruption, and more. Hello, Ben.
Hi, Dan.
And finally, Ben Allgrove is our final panelist. Ben comes to us from the firm side of the legal ecosystem. He is a partner and chief innovation officer at Baker McKenzie. At Baker, he leads reInvent, which is the law firm's innovation program. And this is a program that has really broken new ground as far as bringing cutting edge problem-solving approaches to the world of law firms. Hello, Ben.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me.
Okay. Now, all right, let's get started. I wanted to start with a little inspiration for the audience by proving that change is, in fact, possible in law. Michelle, let's start with you, and let's start by talking about Law Without Walls. With this, you introduced a really novel platform for solving some pretty deep challenges in law. Needless to say, I don't think there's anything quite like this offered by any other law school out there. But for folks who don't know much about it, can you give a little background about what LWOW is and what LWOW is all about?
Sure. So Law Without Walls is a part virtual experiential learning collaboratory of law schools and business schools from all around the world, law firms, law companies, and legal departments from all around the world, lawyers, business professionals, and entrepreneurs. And what we do is we put multidisciplinary teams together, and they go on an innovation journey where they attempt to solve a real business of law challenge that is provided to them by one of our sponsoring entities, corporate legal departments, law firms, and law companies. And through their 3 to 4 month journey where they try to solve a real problem together in a multicultural, intergenerational, multidisciplinary team, they hone new skill sets and new mindsets and new behaviors. And although, of course, it's wonderful when we get the innovation at the end, the real cake, if you will, is the actual change in the way lawyers collaborate, the way they think about their client centricity and design thinking, new mindsets, and really the way they behave. So the way they act in their practice when they return back to their work, and just in general.
And Michelle, what inspired the idea? Because I think that, most lawyers, when they think about problem solving and they think about solving a tough problem, their answer is usually add another lawyer to the team and add another lawyer to the team. But really, like, what inspired this idea of bringing more cross functionality to the world of problem solving in law?
Well, I don't have the typical background of most professors. I spent 8 years in advertising and marketing before I even went to law school. And when I started as a baby professor, I was just so frustrated. And actually, if you Google or Bing, innovations that come from frustrations, there's a ton of them. I was frustrated with all the walls in law, all the hierarchies in academia, the hierarchies between professors and students, the walls between law and business that I didn't actually understand, the walls between schools of different rank and from different cultures, and really the wall between practice and education. And I really wanted to break all that down. Having come from a background where I always worked on multidisciplinary teams, it felt very odd to be put into a world where there was no teaming, because if you recall law school, no matter where you went to law school, there's probably very little teaming in your past, and very little multidisciplinary interaction, even within a school like University of Miami that has, medicine and anthropology and science and business and law. And so my frustrations really are what set me on fire to make some changes.
And when you were working on this and building this out, and you were trying to get backing for this, when you were trying to get people signed on to participate, when you were trying to get this into a sustainable footing, and what were some of the barriers that you were running into? Like, surely the journey wasn't perfectly seamless and smooth the entire way. What were some of the moments of doubt or challenge that you came across?
Well, I'm a big believer in ask forgiveness later. So I'm not afraid of doing things and asking people to join me. And believe me, I went after all the low-hanging fruit, which is all my friends. And I was pleasantly surprised by how many people just said, yes, I'm in, even not understanding maybe what I'm in entailed. That said, for every yes person, there was probably a few no's, the non-believers, the traditional thinkers. This was 12 years ago, and I was introducing a part virtual program where we started in person and then we went virtual. So indeed, I'm the one who found the tech we used. It was called Adobe Connect. And there were maybe 2 others out there that were, Panopto was starting to. enter the marketplace. Back then, when I first started, Google Drive was Google Wave. So there were a lot of people that didn't think it could happen from a technological standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, from a hierarchy, a lot of non-believers in the hierarchy. And then also academia was probably the hardest. And I would have thought they would have been the easiest, but there was a very traditional group of academics that don't think that law school should be about innovation and learning how to team and collaborate. That's not real law.
What's amazing to me, Michelle, is that I'm sure there are many in the audience who realize how hard it is to even bring an entire organization and an entire crew of legal professionals onto the concept of collaborative editing, say real-time collaborative editing on a document. So the fact that that was just one tiny implementation piece of this much larger infrastructure is really just mind-blowing to me. Was there ever like a turning point or a light bulb moment for you when, as you were sort of building this up 12 years ago, you're getting this into place, you're running into these various barriers, you sort of felt like, this is actually going to work. This is actually going to happen. I think we can actually, this has legs. This is going to sustain.
I think it's when I realized that the program was as much, if not more, for the lawyers and the business professionals on the teams as it was for students. I must admit that when I started I was very student focused and thought of the business professionals and entrepreneurs and venture capitalists and lawyers that join these teams as helping the students. And what I realized was that this was an opportunity to help those that were already working, and that in some ways they needed this more than the students did. Students have a license to be creative and have fun. They're paying a lot of money to be in school. And the students' ability to jump in and hone, bring back their crayons, actually gave license to the more experienced professionals on the team to do so as well. And what I realized by about end of year 2 was that the people that were getting the most out of this were the people that were doing this in addition to their day jobs. It was executive education by surprise.
Oh, terrific. That's amazing. Well, Ben Campbell, now I'd like to turn to you. I would love to hear from you about how you've shifted and evolved the approach of your legal team at Deloitte over time and during your tenure as a general counsel.
Sure, Dan. And a couple of the things that we'll talk about actually are things that are very familiar from what Michelle just said. When I got to Deloitte, I came to Deloitte about 7 years ago from Latham & Watkins, and prior to that I was with the government. When I got here, we were fairly rigid in our approach to how we served big parts of our business. And one of the things that was really surprising to me, I came to Deloitte, I expected Deloitte to be an accounting firm, and it is an accounting firm, but the plurality or majority actually now of the work that we do is advisory and consulting work. And we had a legal structure office that was not serving that part of our business, at least on the litigation side, as much as it should. And what that had also created was a very limited pathway for advancement in the organization. And as a result, morale was relatively subdued. People liked the work that they did, but they felt a little unsatisfied about their long-term prospects in the organization. And so it was an opportunity, I think, to reorient our structure a little bit to serve the businesses better. And I think what Michelle said about being surprised about the walls between law and business actually really resonated, because that's been a big emphasis for us to break those down so that our people are as close to the business as possible. They serve the business so much better. It's one of the great things about being in-house is that you are right there in the conversations with the business leaders as they're innovating and coming up with new ideas, and you're there to clear away the impediments and help them succeed or spot the issues and prevent them from falling into the abyss. And our people are really excited about that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ben. I think that's really inspiring to hear that, and also to I think if there's any common theme there, it's that engaging and talking to people one-on-one is a source of tremendous insight. That's both within ourselves and also outside of ourselves in our broader organization. Ben Allgrove. Now, hello and welcome. And if there was one example of a transformation that you wanted to point to that came from the innovation work? I mean, your team is all about reinvention. I mean, literally reinvention is the name of the team, and that is what you do every day. But if there's one example of transformation you wanted to point to that you tackled, I mean, what would it be?
It's interesting. I mean, I think lots of my experiences, are as you'd expect in this space around the things that didn't work. And actually, we've learned a lot as an organization from those things. And in fact, we haven't learned the lessons from some of those things, and we make the same mistakes again and again. But that's, part of the journey, and just one of the frustrations of being tasked with a role like I have, or like anyone who's in a similar type of role. If I had to pick one thing, though, actually, that has worked for us, it was about a learning that I had to have when I started this role 4 years ago now, which was I'm in an organization which prides itself on being entrepreneurial, and a core part of its sort of cultural identity is that it's a very entrepreneurial law firm and has, go out, conquer the world in the early days of globalization, put your flag in a different country and set up the Baker & McKenzie office was how things were done. And that's what success was seen, both intrinsically and financially. That's how you succeeded in a place like Baker & McKenzie. And when I took on this role and started this conversation within the firm, I mistakenly thought entrepreneurialism equaled innovation and being innovative. And those two things aren't the same, is one of the learnings that I had. And the insight that came to me was, yes, we are a very entrepreneurial business, but within the construct of a legal industry where actually it's heavily de-risked. So you understand what you need to do to be successful, and different people have skill sets that drive that success, but the field of play is a known one. And obviously what's happened in the market now and what's happening across industries is that the field of play is changing, becoming more volatile, becoming more overlapping and less certain. And that requires a different skill set and a different conversation. And much of what Michelle said resonated in my experience, because what we realized we had to do was we had to start a different conversation in the business. It wasn't a traditional conversation of talking to the most senior partners, the influential stakeholders, and saying, we need to do this thing, we need to change, we need to target this type of client or this type of market, where you could get buy-in because people understood that and they were willing to take risk in order to do those things. It was a conversation that had to break down hierarchies, roles, and indeed generational plays within the business. And so what we did was, really largely a shot in the dark. We didn't know whether it was going to work, but we set up effectively a dark site on the internal social network platform that we use within Baker's, which we called at the time the Innovation Ambassadors Forum. We didn't publicize it. We didn't invite people to join it. It just started with a few key seeded people talking in an open group on a platform to just see if people would opt in and try and join. And you had to get permission to join. You had to ask to join so that we could see who was asking, where they were coming from within the organization. And over the space of about 18 months, that community organically grew from 0 to now being well over 1,200 people in a 13,000 person organization. So we're looking at 10% roughly of the population who are opting into a conversation about change within the business. And the really interesting and exciting thing that's happened, because it's not everyone's active, as you would imagine in that, but actually daily actives in that group are well over 500 or 600 on most days. So you've got half that group being actively contributing and engaging in a conversation. And what's happened there is that rather than a lot of push information about change within the firm, we've created a forum where people know where to go and say, has somebody tried this before? And what's the most inspiring thing in the day when I see it, as I sort of log on and have a look, is quite often you have a practice head or a senior partner asking a question and it being answered by a paralegal in Lima, Peru, or by one of our shared services team in Manila, Philippines. Now that conversation would never have happened before between a senior partner in New York and somebody, in a business services function in Peru or Manila. And that's opened people's eyes. Now, I'm not going to try and say there's been universal cultural change, and that is a sort of a journey that we're still going under. But opening that door, and ironically, COVID's been a horrible time for everyone. But one of the advantages, if there are any advantages, is having smashed through the geographic barrier as well. So you have the sort of hierarchical barrier, which we're already starting to break down. And we've now had the impetus to say, well, look, everyone can just reach out and ask for a Zoom chat or ask for a Skype conversation because we've all shown it can be done. And that level effect allows ideas to percolate. And so the fact that we've got that sustainable community, our strategy is broken down to 3 parts: improve, engage, and explore. And really that engagement piece has been the story of the first 3 to 4 years. We're now shifting into a new phase now with reInvent. But it really was, I can't say there was this huge design. It was a bit of an experiment of seeding it with the right content, the right people, the right stakeholders within the organization that people would want to listen to, or at least feel they should listen to, and see what's going on. And we're really proud. We're really proud of that. It's certainly, it's not an innovation in itself. It hasn't produced the product, the killer app, whatever you want to call it. But what it's done is open a channel for a proportion of our population to have a different conversation to the one that the normal law firm structure, allows you to have.
Terrific. And, I think that a couple of the themes I'm hearing there is thinking about the adoption curve and focusing on those early adopters who are going to just crawl through the mud and the muck and through barbed wire to get to there. And so by doing this in the way that you did it, I feel like you engineered a really good way of actually identifying that subset of people within the firm. And also this idea of like the highest ranking person is not always the best person to answer a particular question or tackle a particular thing. And I think, from someone who comes from a government environment, I see that emerge over and over again, where there's this assumption that the highest ranking person is the best person and the person to talk to. And actually it's sometimes quite the opposite. That's terrific.
Well, one of the gaps we found, like a big gap, if we take a practical sort of example, as the business has digitized, we're now at a position where I tell my partners, we have all the toys, right? We have pretty much all the market comparable tech you'd expect to have in order to practice law in an efficient, modern way in 2021. That wasn't the case 5 years ago. So we've fixed that problem. But adoption in certain areas is still patchy. And you get this frustration of saying, why aren't you doing it differently using these new tools? Actually, the piece that's missing is not the technology, and our technology team's great at providing the tech. It's the person who can join the dots between the domain expertise, the client expertise of what does the clients want, the process improvements and the process re-engineering, and the technology. How do you package all that up and help the lawyers and indeed help the clients quite often, right? It's not just a question of law firm side. It's a two-way conversation inevitably if you're really trying to do something different. That skill set is just not something that most law firms are structured to deliver. It's just not the way that the organizations have been built. And so, Ben's comments about sort of repackaging the way the organization structure applies equally in the law firm context. So that's one of the things we're playing with right now is how do you do that? And actually, it's really hard to do at scale as well, right? That's a skill set that's quite hard to find in the market. It's quite hard to reward and give people status in a law firm for that type of role to the extent of the value it delivers, to be perfectly honest. And so that's something we're still exploring at this stage. But the key thing is about not only identifying who's that community of people that can start the conversation, it's then saying, of those, can we pluck out people who might want to do a slightly different role to the one that they're currently in, and seeing if we can repurpose them within the business as well.
Well, I mean, really, that is such a terrific segue because, our audience today is full of change makers. These are people who are trying to alter the status quo in possibly some very tough environments. In some cases, it's exactly what you described, Ben Allgrove, around this idea of, we can put the infrastructure in place. We can, bring the horse to water, but we can't make him drink, right? Like, it's that last mile piece that often I think is where our members come in, is how do we enable that final piece? How do we get it over the goal line? Whatever analogy you want to use. And so that's why I want to throw this out as a general question to the panel. I mean, what advice do you have as people who have each sort of actually successfully managed to get the horse to drink, to get the ball over the goal line? What advice do you have for the audience about actually being successful in making that happen and enabling that? And I'm going to throw it to Ben Campbell first to start.
Oh, I'll take the first shot. I'm not going to pretend that I have a magic silver bullet on, but I would say it kind of goes back to something that you said and Ben Allgrove said about making sure that you understand what people want, and talk to them to understand what's motivating them. Because you're actually going to find, and I had years of experience in the government too, Dan, and your observation that sometimes the most innovative ideas resonate in different places in the organization. Ben Allgrove's example of folks in Manila talking to the managing partner in New York about innovative ideas. I've seen that over and over and over. And if you don't take the effort to understand what other people want to do, you're not going to recognize the opportunities for change that exist, and you're not going to find the right people who are going to be motivated to do it. We had to look a little outside our classic talent model to identify people who are interested in doing that kind of thing. And I feel very fortunate to work in an organization that is not as regimented in its talent approaches as a law firm. Law firms basically have one or two models for success. And Ben Allgrove's point about thinking about a new way to compensate for and reward someone who thinks differently, who provides a different value proposition, is a real challenge. We struggle with this all the time, and Deloitte is 112,000 people. And we're looking constantly at different ways to reward more innovation. And that's the thing that I would focus on, is understanding what people want and finding a way to realize how you can motivate them and reward them for success. That will then bring them together, and that will drive innovation. If you don't channel that, then you're going to create more impediments to change, because people are going to be reluctant to stick their neck out. They're not going to be rewarded when they do it. They're going to be uncomfortable in an organization that doesn't really recognize their value. They're going to leave, and they're going to go somewhere else. They're going to innovate with your competitors, and then you're going to lose. And I don't know about you all, but I'm a little competitive. I kind of like to win. And talking to our talent really is the way to start that.
That's a great point, Ben. And one maxim I always remember that's guided me throughout my career is, the idea that no one is a villain of their own story, and no one thinks of themselves as, oh, I'm resistant to change. Nobody actually views themselves in that light. That's actually a fairly dismissive and marginalizing view of people, where everyone I've ever met has actually thought of themselves as defending some sensible value or goal. And I think that what you're speaking to is exactly that, which is like, it's lazy to say, oh, they're just resistant to change. It's actually much more fruitful to dig deeper and ask, what is the value that's motivating this person? What do they actually care about, and what's driving them?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's actually, and when you think about it, lawyers actually are pretty well positioned to do this, because a big part of what we do is uncover the motivation behind what our opponents, whether it's a negotiation, whether it's an M&A transaction, whether it's a litigation, what's behind the reasons why are our opponents doing what they're doing. What I learned in law school was to spend as much time thinking in the other person's shoes as in my own. If you can do that, then you understand what their motivations are and what the resistance is, and then you can think of ways to try and overcome that. And that, if you can do that, brings them into the fold, gets them excited about change. Change isn't going to happen unless people are excited about it. But you, if you're going to drive the change, need to find a way to motivate them and get them excited about it. That's what leadership is. And I don't want to pretend that I'm a leader. History will judge whether that's accurate or not. But I do like to talk to people and find out what's on their minds and what they're interested in, and then find ways to channel it, because it makes them successful. If they succeed, I succeed.
Terrific. Now, Ben Allgrove, I'm going to throw it over to you. A piece of advice, general, maxim or advice you'd give the folks in the audience to be effective and successful change makers.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you two. The first one's a fairly simple one. I think you have to be willing to put your political capital on the line for the things that really matter. If you're not willing to do that, then people aren't going to believe you and back you in the process. And my experience is, and I've been lucky in this, I've been having some incredibly gracious and supportive backers. But the key question has always been, are you really behind this, Ben? Are you willing to stand up in front of the partners and say, this is what we should do? And are you willing to take the heat when it fails, to be perfectly frank? And so I think that's a core one. And depending on where you are in an organization, your ability to do that obviously is impacted, but I think that's a core one. The second one, again, is a bit of a learning that I went through, and that we're starting repositioning ourselves. I am now a skeptic of sort of standalone innovation teams. You'll see that we describe reInvent as our innovation program, and that's quite deliberate. And there are people involved in that, and people who spend the majority of their time working on change projects. But we experimented a lot with innovation hubs and with innovation teams and with dedicated projects. And what we found was that it didn't help us affect change in the core of the organization because people saw it as something that somebody else would do for them, right? What's this thing you're going to bring to me that changes the way my world works? Which inevitably created friction when you tried to do it because the change management piece is the hardest bit of the whole process. And actually your efforts to change became a negative, right? You became an annoyance because you were getting in the way of the day job. And so we've really made a big effort to focus away from it being something that somebody else does for you, or a perception that that's what it is. That was never the intention, to being something that is part of the day job. And I think you have to find the way within your organization, which definitely requires senior sponsorship and direction from the top, but also requires, relatively granular breaking it down to say, what does this mean for you in this particular line of business or in this particular vertical that we operate in? So to give you an example, one of the sort of break it down questions we've given to our practice leaders at various levels around the world is, look, don't worry about the word innovation. And in fact, I argued against being called Chief Innovation Officer for a long time, but I've various reasons have conceded now that that's the right title. But say to our practices, say, look, just look at what you do now. At where do you get 80% of your revenue, right? Which one of them is under margin pressure and what are you going to do about it? That's my version of innovation for you, right? That's your job, is to go think about that question. And when you come back to me, I can connect you with the people who can help you with the technology solutions to try and drive down the cost of delivery or to improve the quality and the price, right? But I don't want you to come and ask me and say, what AI tool have you got for me, Ben, until you've had that conversation amongst the lawyers in the group. And we've got various versions of that for different functions, but really focused on that core business thing. And then having separate to that, the aspirational piece. So the moonshots, which are more about, it's great if they work, and we've got a few that we're playing on, but the real value about them is the ambition and the messaging that comes from that we are trying to do the big things. But actually 95% of the effort is, what you probably wouldn't label as innovation, but just sensible business management and change management in a structure. So I think that's another one, is really break it down into simple steps that somebody can do and see as part of their day job, rather than being something different to what their day job is.
And I mean, a great point, I think, is this idea of like, know the problem you're solving. As simple as that. Understand the problem you're solving. It's, it's not just about like, oh, what new tool or system can we implement and what shiny new thing can we move into. It's actually understanding why or what is the point and what is the value of it.
I think that's right. I mean, Dan, you and I were on a panel, I think 4 years ago now, and I probably made this point back then, which was that lots of the legal tech vendors that were coming out were probably going to fail. And we're seeing that consolidation happening in the market now. But one of the reasons was there were lots of solutions looking for a problem. I'm not the only person who said that. Everyone on every panel in the Insight has said that for years. But it was true, right? You had people coming out of good private practice law firms, having been a 3 or 4 year associate doing transactions, and saying there's a better way to do this little piece of the puzzle, but without a perception of the end-to-end market they were serving or the other drivers that were in that market. And so would white shoe New York law firms do the sorts of deals they were doing on a common platform at this stage in the market's development? Yes, it'd be much more efficient if all the documents were in one place and we just use change. But the reality is the clients wouldn't allow their data to be stored in that format in a central place. There's a whole lot of evolution of market sort of comfort with that before you can put the right tool. The tools were great, right? Most of them are really good, but the market wasn't ready for it. That wasn't the problem they were trying to solve. Another example is I went to a great pitch in reInvent, one of our innovation hubs, which we do have in Frankfurt, reinvent.law, pitched by, what is effectively was a much better version of word processing, Microsoft Word, really collaborative, useful. But I had to say to the person pitching it to me, I said, at the end of the day, my biggest problem as a lawyer is not how Word functions. Like, I'm sorry, in the greater scheme of the problems I'm trying to solve, version control, I've got that in a document management system. I can do those track changes. You need to figure out where you add value to a problem I've got right now. You've got a great product, but not right now. It's not something that is going to, I'm going to prioritize. So I think, again, finding those pain points, if it's in a house context, I've seen this with clients when we're trying to work with projects with them. What is it that either the business or the lawyers servicing that business actually need? And then give them a quick win as soon as you possibly can to show that you've got potential to solve the bigger problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do, to that point about the word, that's a terrific example. I think it's one of those situations where, we always like try to ask ourselves, is this a top 10 problem for this person? Is this a top 5 problem? Because they're not going to bother changing and moving and doing all the hard work it'll take if it's not a top 5 or top 10 type problem. Yeah, terrific. Okay, Michelle, thoughts and advice.
I feel like everybody said it all. What we've been talking about is something that I always refer to as the field of dreams problem. Back maybe 20 years ago, there was a movie with Kevin Costner called Field of Dreams, and he is trying to build a baseball field in the middle of nowhere in the United States. And a voice says to him in the corn stalks, "If you build it, they will come." And I always say to all my teams, it's not true. Just because you build it doesn't mean they'll come. Field of Dreams problem, guys. Like, great. You found a solution without a problem that anybody's going to do or care about. And so there was this great Harvard Business Review article by a guy named, I think, David Burkus, years ago in the early 2000s, where he says something, ideation is not an idea problem. And I totally believe that. Talking to all my venture capital friends, their ideas are a dime a dozen. What I say the problem is, ideation is a problem. And the problem is people don't get on the same problem plane. We can all be headed to Miami and think we're headed in the same direction, but we're on two slightly different problem planes. And unless you get the team on the same problem, so they really understand, as all of you were talking about, the two Bens and you, Dan, about, what is the real problem? What is the need? What is the motivator? And who are the different audiences? Because although lawyers are good at understanding the opponents, sometimes they forget those other people that are involved and have to actually help bring the solution to fruition or might get impacted by the problem. So for me, my advice is focus on the problem, spend a lot more time on the problem than you think you should, and ask why, the 5 whys, ask them 10 times and get your lawyers to ask it over and over. The other thing I'd say is, my advice would be, in addition to focusing on the problem, it would be, for me, I think the only way to really affect change is for the leader to be a leader and a manager. I know that people say, oh, leaders are born, right? So Ben, maybe you were born a leader. I believe it, right? You inspire people, you get to know people, you care about the big things, you can let the little things go. Whereas when they say about what they say about managers is, managers care about all the little things, and they're in the mud with you, and they're working all the detail out. And in my experience, given that I guess over 75% of change management efforts fail, for me, I don't understand why we don't think of innovation as both. And I think it's only when you have leader managers driving people that, like you, Ben, right? You're clearly both. You're leaders and you're managing. And with Law Without Walls, it was interesting because the first couple of years, people all acted like, oh, wow, it was so cool we got here. They didn't realize we had 5 steps. We had 5 slides. We had a method. And there's a method to the madness. You don't always want people to know that you've detailed out how many meetings, when this needs to happen, by what time. But that level of management that's already been accepted in change management, I think people in innovation need to embrace, because innovation doesn't just happen because you say, innovate, right? So there are the aha moments, but the aha moments, Stephen Johnson has that great book, Where Good Ideas Come From. It's like the slow hunch theory, where ideas build upon ideas. That'd be my advice. And then the last thing I'd say is, both Bens mentioned this. I wish we thought about every opportunity when we're trying to solve a problem the way we would if we're on a plane. When you're on a plane and something goes wrong, you don't care what the person's background is, how old they are, if they can help. So if somebody has a health issue on a plane, someone will say, well, I once took, I was a lifeguard once, get them over here. It doesn't matter your level of expertise or your background or what country you're from. If there's an emergency and you need help. And it seems to me that if we spent a little more time thinking about what are the talents and traits and values of all the people on our team instead of the hierarchies and levels, we would open a door to more creative problem solving. Now, I didn't say anything new. I just basically said what the Bens said.
I think that this is a time where I want everyone to put their futurist hat on, which is, where do you see the big opportunities right now that are ripe for transformation in the business of law? And what are those areas where, if we're not thinking about it right now, we should be very, very worried? And maybe that is exactly what a lot of the things that we've touched on a lot of these themes. But, I'm really kind of curious where your mind is going and where your sort of spidey sense is working towards, as far as like, what is that opportunity that I'm looking at where I think that we can make big waves, in the next year, 5 years, 10 years. And I'll start with Ben Campbell for this one.
So I actually think that we are on the cusp of major technological change. Ben Allgrove talked about this earlier, made an excellent observation, which is there were lots of solutions out there earlier that were in search of problems. I think the solutions are now getting to the point where they're going to be able to solve some of the major problems at scale. And that, I think, presents in the next few years some real changes for professional services industries. I think we are, it feels like we're on the cusp of a scale up in technological capability. It feels a little bit like what happened to manufacturing in the 80s and 90s, when a lot of routine jobs got automated through robotics. It feels like there's a lot of the capability of AI that can apply increasingly with even less and less data. So your point about Ben, about data is absolutely correct. Like AI sits on top of data. Data is the engine in the gas tank. The gas in the engine that makes AI go. And I actually think AI is getting better and better, and will be able to apply to more stuff that it will be able to do it with a narrower data set, which then allows for more applications over and over at scale. And when that happens, I actually think that creates some real challenges for the apprentice model that is the basis for the legal industry and the development of talent. My biggest concern, honestly, is not so much technological innovation, because I actually think for the current crop of lawyers, that'll be a great thing, because it'll free up a lot of their time from more ministerial tasks so they can do the kind of things that they really like. Creating the space for innovation would be one of those, for example. But I am worried about long term, how do we train the next generations of lawyers to do to really think legally, if they're not doing that sort of same ministerial work that we all did when we first graduated from law school? That was helpful. I understood, why are facts important? What do I do with a document? How do I ask questions in a deposition? And you can't just vault over that. Maybe there's a way, and I think, Michelle, you've probably got some great insights into how to think about, training this next generation of lawyers. That's what I think is the thing that that's where my spidey sense is tingling. It's not so much technological change. I think it will be great, but I think the impact it will have on the profession will be profound. It'll change talent models. It'll probably break down, the classic apprentice model, because it's going to have to, and it's going to give us opportunities to bring more and more people into the profession who will approach it in a different way, but ensuring that they all are working and developing and progressing so that they can do the work that we need done at the highest levels, trying the big complicated cases, negotiating the big transactions, that they're able to do that in a few years. And I haven't figured that one out.
And I think that's a terrific point. And really, I think 5 years ago, we would have been talking about like, oh, how do we get adoption of these new tools and technology? How are we driving that? I think that now you're right, Ben Campbell, that this is an inevitability, really. And I think of it almost like word processors, when word processors came online, and you didn't want to be the last legal organization using a typing tool as opposed to word processors, because it was a 10x productivity difference. You were roadkill essentially at that point. But so it is, in many ways, I view a lot of the core technologies as that, but it's really, I think you've raised a great point around the implications of that, though. And I'm curious, any reactions or thoughts to that from Michelle or Ben Allgrove?
So I guess if I'm putting my, what'd you call it, Spidey hat on?
Futurist hat.
Okay, my futurist hat on for the three groups: academia, in-house, and law firms. For academia, I'd say I'm really glad I'm a professor now and not 20 years from now, or maybe I still will be by then. I would say things need to change, not just in how we teach, but also who we target to come to law school, and how we think about the application process, and what type of credentials, and I would say less credentials, but work experience that law school students before they come should have. For example, I think every law school student should have to have worked before they actually get to law school. And this is true both in the US and outside the US. And outside the US, people get law degrees right after high school. And I think it's going to be really hard to be a lawyer that adds value without having some other types of business and service industry experience. I think if every law school student was a barista at Starbucks for a year before they came to law school, we would see a huge change in the way that clients rate their lawyers. That said, I think there is something to thinking differently about who we accept and the mix. We need a more diverse group in law school to mirror the diverse group that's going to be outside of law school. Not to mention, of course, a change in not just what we teach, but how, right? The world has moved from focusing on the what to the how. And when clients ask for innovation, what they're really asking is for lawyers to change how they provide service. Let's be a little more, client-centric. And I think this is true for law schools as well. It's going to be an uphill battle, but I'm hoping to be part of that change. That's one. For futuristic, for in-house, I think the biggest change for in-house is, I think the way in-house legal departments are going to show that they add value, and the way they do add value in reality is going to change dramatically with digital transformation. I think in-house already, the Ben Campbells of the world are looking at and everybody in CLOC, right? Looking at how do we make things more efficient, but also from a very client-centric and customer-centric standpoint, how do we focus on changing the way we service our internal clients and help us get speed to market in contracts and get sales to our customers is going to greatly change. And that in-house legal departments will have P&Ls and be driving revenue and be considered not in-house legal departments, but just the legal department, like the marketing department. Maybe we get rid of that word in-house. And then for law firms, I think the biggest change for law firms, if I was at one right now, is I'd work on how do I leverage the multidisciplinary people in my firm. Firms have done a great job at hiring heads of marketing, heads of BD, heads of innovation, that aren't still practicing as well. How do you marshal all that talent and help law firms leverage that talent to make a difference? Because right now I feel that group is still a little bit separate and other. And I think for the future, they'll have to be one with the lawyers.
So +1 to all those comments from both Ben and Michelle. To add to that, I think one of the narratives that I find troubling in the legal innovation conversation is one that actually undervalues legal domain expertise. So lawyers have a skill set, and it's a valuable skill set. It's the reason there's an industry around this. And if we talk about the future 5 years out without saying, well, where does that skill set still deliver value? And how do you package it up with the data, the technology, the service delivery models that are emerging in order to leverage that skill set? If we forget to do that, then actually it makes that change journey even harder, right? Because you're effectively talking to people about dinosaurs and calling them dinosaurs, and that's not a way to get people on the train to change things. You have to say, no, actually, we really do value you. And I gave a speech a few years ago in New York, actually, around what's the role of the trusted advisor in the future of law? Because every lawyer from the day they start gets told that the ultimate sort of mark of success is being the trusted advisor, the person that your client picks up the phone to when everything is really hitting the fan. What does that look like in this new world? Because you don't have the apprenticeship training model, you don't have the leverage model that lets you learn those skills. And I think the opportunity is to figure that out, right? Can I deliver high volume, efficient services using an automated system? Yeah, I can figure all that out, right? There'll be business models we'll work out. But the really interesting stuff, the stuff that gets your most talented people and retains them, is where they feel needed and feel that they're that trusted advisor. And figuring out where those opportunities are going to be in the legal market in 10 years' time is still very much a work in progress. I don't have the answer to that, but that to me is the opportunity. If you can crack that, that's where you win commercially, because that's where you can deliver value. Everything else becomes the infrastructure with which you deliver that thing, which at its core is really sort of machine learning enabled judgment, right? That's what you're trying to deliver. Because at the end of the day, I can predict, I'm a litigator, I can predict to a client that we've got a 65% chance of winning this case. I can then use technology to, support that instinct more than anything else. And so actually it's 64.3%. So I'm pretty good on that prediction. But at the end of the day, you still need that person who can sit in the room and say, yeah, but I still don't think we should run this one, right? Or I think we should, whichever way around it is, because this is the one that's going to change the law. And that piece, that trust piece, is really hard to replicate with data. And actually, I think really dangerous to defer to technology in order to replace that role, because one of the great skill sets of lawyers is questioning and challenging the facts and challenging the status quo. And I think the real tension is saying, well, how do we train lawyers who can say, yeah, I can see that's what the machine's saying, but it doesn't look right to me, right? And that's a skill set I think it's going to be really hard to build up in time. So I'd be looking for those opportunities, as I say, where you say, where can we build trust relationships that combine, humans, good judgment, and legal domain expertise, ideally the power of data and machine learning and data science to deliver better outcomes. And that's where I'm, certainly where I'm encouraging my firm to be investing and focusing right now.
Well, and I think, really, to me, a lot of this is around this idea of cross-functionality that we're seeing emerging everywhere, like people working in close coordination and collaboration with multiple disciplines. And then where does a lawyer fit into that concept, and how can they be an effective part of a cross-functional collaborative team with multiple disciplines and multiple kind of, different skill sets. And that's, I think that's all really incredible food for thought. Well, I want to just turn now to final thoughts and reflections. I think this has been an incredibly enlightening, really, really interesting discussion. We've inspired people, I think, to believe that change is possible. We've given them and empowered them with some tools and advice on how to make it happen. And then we've also put a little lens on the future about where should we be going and where should folks be looking next to drive change. Any final thoughts or reflections from the panel? And I'm going to start with Michelle.
I guess I'd say think small right now, even though we just ended with big thoughts on big changes of the future. I think what both Bens talked about in terms of innovation is really not this big, huge, innovative solution. It can be small, tiny changes that add incremental value. So I would say think small, and you'd be surprised how much big impact you can get.
Ben Allgrove.
There's lots of things you could say. I'll pick one. I think if you are not making people uncomfortable, then you're not doing your job. So I often describe my role internally as making our leaders uncomfortable and being constantly dissatisfied myself. It's not a great job description, but that's the reality of my world. So I think if all the conversations are easy and everyone buys into it, then you're probably not pushing the envelope hard enough.
Terrific. And take us home, Ben Campbell.
I'll try. First, my gratitude to you, Dan, for inviting me to be on this panel, and to Ben and Michelle for your insights. I learned a lot. I'd say, enjoy the journey, actually. Change is hard, but change is fun. It's great to see it work when it works. It's really awesome to see people get excited about it. And I think Michelle's observation that change is actually a series of small steps is right on the nose. And that actually should give everybody a lot of hope that all of us, everybody can be an innovator. It just takes time and effort and commitment to talk to other people, understand their problems, and then help them solve them. That's what lawyers do. And that's part of how we got into the profession in the first place. And it's exciting when it works. And it does work. It doesn't always fail. And some of the conversations are uncomfortable, but you would be surprised at the number of people who are excited about uncomfortable conversations. It's more than you think.
And with that, thank you again to Thomson Reuters, and an enormous thank you to Michele DeStefano, Ben Allgrove, Ben Campbell. This has been a terrific conversation. I really appreciate it. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.